and then welcome to my book corner. We have another book review for you today, and I want to thank the author David Clegg for sending this one in to me in return for a fair review, which is what we're going to do today. So this is part 1, Slave Ship of the Aule Stratagem. Probably just butchered that pronunciation like I always do. This is a sci-fi / space opera, I think that's the right term. Book coming in at 283 pages long and was first released in January of 2021. As always, we shall start by talking a little bit about the story before going on to talk about the characters, the setting and world building, the presentation before I give my final thoughts at the end. Let's dive straight in. The story here is a pretty simple one. This is set in the Aule Sector, where there are a number of independent powers and star systems, and the shipping lanes are coming under increasingly coordinated attack by pirates. Now, one of the two major powers, the Confederacy, are loosely aligned with a number of these powers, although these powers are still independent, and so it is in their interest to make sure that the piracy stops so the freighters can get through. And as a result of this, the Aurora, which is a light cruiser, is dispatched to the sector to do patrols to help or attempt to break up the pirate attacks that are going on. And this uncovers a number of questions like, why are the pirates so coordinated? Where are they getting their military hardware? And how are they always one step ahead of the Navy? And what you have here is almost a cat and mouse game as the Aurora goes out into the main system, hunting for pirates, but kind of off the grid. And we begin to slowly peel back how the pirates are doing what they're doing, how they are being funded, and potential other players in the background. And we do have this from the point of view largely of three main characters. The first one being Lieutenant Commander Patterson, who is the new tactical officer on the Aurora. We have Kara, who is a prisoner who's been taken by the pirates and is going to be sold into slavery. And we have Cott, who is the pirate captain. It is a very, very simple premise, and it's not one you won't have seen before elsewhere, but it is very well handled, and it is a premise that does lend itself to some interesting storytelling, especially with the 3 points of view here. So, relatively simple, but effective. There are a number of characters here. I'm going to focus on the 3 main characters, as I'm going to call them, which is Lieutenant Commander Patterson, Captain Cott of the Pirates, and Kara. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on them for a couple of different reasons, because the character work here is quite muted, and that is in part deliberate. So we'll start with Lieutenant Commander Patterson. We do get plenty of stuff about his backstory, the fact that they're from a military family, but specifically Marines rather than Navy. Their dad is a high-flying member of the government who has been advocating for years for an increase on military spending, believing that war is coming with their old enemy, the Empire, or the Imperium. Can't remember which the terminology is off the top of my head. And very much Patterson has gone against the grain of the family. But like all the other main members of the Navy, the majority of the work we get is just snippets here of what their personalities are like, as the majority of the scenes that take place from their point of view is in quite formal situations where kind of the uniform and the badge are formal. So a lot of the interactions almost feel quite robotic, but that is a symbol of the professionalism of the Navy and these characters. You get the odd quip in there, you get a few bits and pieces here and there that add layers to the characters, and you do have a number of different situations where you go slightly outside of, say, the bridge crew, for want of a better term, where they're in the mess hall talking. But there's not massive amounts here, but what there is enough of here is to give you a sense of real togetherness of this crew, especially with Patterson being quite new to the crew as well, with their first assignment with them after their previous tactical officer left and was dearly loved. So you have an interesting integration going on here, but integration through the immense professionalism of the crew. And that then juxtaposes quite nicely with the pirates, because the pirates actually in many ways have the most personality in this. So Cott and his entire crew are relatively well defined compared to everybody else. You can see what their clear goals are, be it just a thirst for killing, to provide money and support for their families. They are clearly normal people that are doing this for a specific reason, not just generic bad guys. And in some cases, don't really like what they're doing, or in other cases, wholeheartedly are throwing themselves into it. And then finally, you have Kara. Kara is someone who is taken quite early on, right in the first chapter of the book, to be sold as a slave. And again, whilst we get bits and pieces, and a lot of that is initially in the first chapter while Kara is speaking to their XO on the freighter before they're attacked, a lot of Kara's story is just the survival mode. So again, whilst you do get little snippets here and there, the focus of the character is on surviving and escaping. And that is the whole focus of this. There's no exposition backstory, which you quite often get to try and build a level of sympathy for these characters. You see what the character and the characters nearby to them are going through, and you just get the sense of impending dread and fear. Do these characters have a great deal of depth? Yes and no. You don't really see it, again, because of the way the story is being framed. So you very much have a need to survive, doing this for reasons, and the military professionalism that works to actually balance out the three narratives really, really well. And it does do its job in making you care about the characters as well, which is more than you quite often get with other tales that feel the need to do info dumps and backstory dumps or flashbacks and stuff like that. By just eking out these little bits and pieces here and there, it does enough to actually make you care about the characters. And what's really interesting, especially with the military side of this, is when you have a situation where that military professionalism breaks down, you see the consequences of it and why that professionalism is so important in keeping people safe and alive and maintaining their mental health and discipline. And that is really, really well done for me. More than any other genre, sci-fi lives and dies, for me personally, on its world building, and I'm happy to say this does not disappoint. Be that technical specification for ships and weapon systems, as well as a good explanation for how the hyperlight travel works and how long things take, to going into the different class systems that still exist in this world and what life looks like in the inner worlds versus this sort of more scattered independent lands as well. And the idea that you do still have this battle of almost a class system and familial legacy going on, and to a limited extent nepotism as well, you can probably say, as well as the idea of going against the grain, as Lieutenant Commander Patterson does by joining the Navy rather than the Marines, is really well done. And then you have the political intrigue as well, be it at home in the Confederacy, where you have a number of people arguing that it is a time for peace and to defund the military, whereas you have a number of older heads who are saying that we should remain ready to protect ourselves. We don't know what's around the corner. Sounds a bit familiar, to be honest. I'm sure we have similar conversations right now. And we should keep our readiness up and invest now while it's peaceful in case it ever stops being. That's really interesting. And then you can contrast that with sort of the Aule sector itself with all its independent systems, and some of these systems are really, really poor. The standard of life isn't great. There are plenty of morally dubious people planet side and in space as well, and corruption is rife as a way to make ends meet because of how poor these places are. And even just touching on the Empire as well, although we don't get a huge amount, you get an idea of a complete cultural clash between the Empire and the Confederacy, with a sense that they will probably come to blows again at some point because of how ideologically different they are. It's really, really well done. And a lot of this is driven home really well by repetition on the theme over and over again, especially in terms of the Navy and the way that the Navy worked. And you can feel the fingerprints of sci-fi inspiration from big TV series all over this. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in presentation in a moment. But overall, I really enjoyed this. This feels like a realistic, living, breathing world, which is the sort of sci-fi I tend to enjoy the most. So, in terms of presentation then, and a few different things to go over here, more than we normally do actually. So you can feel the fingerprints of inspiration all over this from big sci-fi franchises. Number of different things. So you have very much almost like a Babylon 5 class system going on within the Confederacy. You get a little bit of a sense of that. Nepotism being most definitely a thing here, and whilst not necessarily corruption per se, not everything is quite as straightforward as it perhaps should be. So you do have almost this two classes within the military, which you do sometimes see within a number of different sci-fi series. For the Navy itself, more specifically, though, there is a streak of idealism running through it, which is reminiscent of Starfleet from Star Trek, which I appreciate. But the way the ship actually runs, and this is sort of the most sort of pull that got me, was the remake of the Battlestar Galactica series, because as the fights, the space battles were playing out, it felt like you were in Galactica's CDC with Adama shouting out the orders to the various different people around, and the constant shouting and communication back in a very professional way, but all coming back to the captain or the tactical officer and being pushed back out. Really reminded me of that, and because of the way the technology level kind of feels in this as well, it reminded me even more of Galactica from that regard, and I absolutely adore Galactica, so I was all here for that. Then you're looking at the Aule Sector itself, and that's very reminiscent of the Outer Rim from Star Wars due to the level of lawlessness and corruption. You've got slavers, you've got pirates, independent freighters, rampant capitalism. We all know how that works. So that's really good. And then you also have the Imperium or the Empire as well, and that this very much feels like it will potentially be an analogy for the Empire from Star Wars, although there's a few little things in here that, and I'm not sure why, remind me a little bit of the Centauri again from Babylon 5 as well. So all really, really good stuff. And coming back to the fight scenes and mentioning that they reminded me of Battlestar Galactica, there is a level of repetition here which some people are not going to like, because every fight scene, a battle scene I should say, kind of starts the same way, which makes complete sense because this is a military operation, so they've got to go from A to B to C to D to E. They can't just go A to Z and just shoot everybody. That's not how it works. And it does do a good job when that repetition is broken and you see the repercussions of that, driving home why it is as it is. So I personally appreciated it. Other people might find that a little bit repetitive. The other thing worth mentioning here as well is the chapter length. Now, I thought this was perfectly fine, but what doesn't happen here, which you see in many books now, is when you change perspective, it does not flip to another chapter. So quite often you'll start a chapter with Patterson before going to Cott and then to Kara and then back to Patterson, rather than having Patterson chapter, Cott chapter, Kara chapter, and then swinging round like that. And I get the impression that each chapter is setting place in quite a narrow time frame, so it's all happening at the same time. So I personally like that style, but I know some people do like their shorter chapters as well. The other thing I do want to mention, though, is the ending, because I did not like the ending of this. And I think this speaks to the way that I read versus I watch, because the ending of this feels like the ending of a two-parter for a TV show or a series end for a TV show. You have the da-da-da sort of cliffhanger at the end, but it feels like a TV cliffhanger rather than a book one, which feels like a weird thing to say, but to me, they need slightly different things. And it felt like a bit too action heavy for a book ending, for me personally. Not going to stop me reading the second book, but it is a very abrupt stop at the end, and it feels very much like it would be done in the way of how a two-part TV program in a series would be done. But overall, though, I think the presentation was really strong, with a couple of caveats depending on what sort of reader that you are. Final thoughts then, and I enjoyed this quite a bit. It, more than anything else, did evoke a sense of vibe that I got from Battlestar Galactica and Babylon 5 more than any of the other inspirations that I could feel in here. And as I believe they're both kind of underrated gems at this point, two of my favourite sci-fi shows of all time, I was always going to really enjoy this. Now, it's not going to be for everyone. The chapter lengths are a bit long for some of the people that I know, because I know they like short, sharp burst chapters. Personally, didn't bother me. The repetition as well can become a bit dry at times, but again, that is by design and makes sense for the world and the characters and what's going on, but it's not going to be for everyone. And also, as mentioned, if you don't like sharp cut-offs and cliffhangers, you won't like the ending of this. But overall, I had a great time with this. I'll definitely be grabbing book 2 at some point. I gave this a solid 4 stars out of 5. I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you again to David for sending me this. I really appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll catch you all very soon.